Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we are witnessing some of the ugliest moments that have ever played out on an American college campuses, and it's gone from LA to New York now. It's the culmination of 20 years of our young students from the point they start K through 12 all the way through college, having their minds poisoned against America, against Israel, against the values of this great country. And now they're out there chanting hateful slogans, intimidating students from getting an education, wishing death and rape upon Jewish students. It is perhaps one of the darkest moments the American education system has ever seen. I thought to put this in perspective and also to call out those who may be behind all this, I'd bring in one of my favorite guests. He is the host of one of my favorite podcasts, the P.A.S. Report. If you don't listen to it, subscribe to it. It's incredible. He's a campus reform, higher education fellow, and I think one of the smartest people when it comes to the state of our academic system, my good friend, Nick Giordano. Nicholas, good to have you back on.
Always a pleasure to be with you, John.
I've been looking for words to describe what we're seeing play out on the most elite campuses in this country. The only word that comes to mind to me is insanity, but I'm not sure that even captures it. Your thoughts on the moment we're witnessing?
It's really interesting. This is a poison that's been injected into the education system for at least the last 2 decades, and we are now witnessing the results of this, where we're seeing these extremists rise up on college campuses. And at campus reform, we actually have a rolling list of anti-Israel occupation settlements on college campuses that are replicating Columbia University settlements. And these can't be called protests. I know the media is trying to frame it as if these are anti-war protests. They are not protests, okay? I'm someone that does support protests. I encourage people to speak up, use their God-given rights. But the second you infringe on other people's liberties, the second you try and infringe on their ability to move around campus or cross a bridge or go to an airport, the second that you try and shut down people's right to attend in-person classes, or you threaten, harass, and even assault other people, the protest has ended. These are radical extremists that are going around chanting and praising Hamas, chanting death to America. They want to see October 7th 10,000 more times. We've seen through the TikTok videos the younger generation having a sympathetic view of Osama bin Laden, and that shows how the education system has poisoned the minds of so many young people that are going to one day lead this nation that they despise so much. Now, I never thought I would live through an event where I would see Americans on college campuses screaming death to America, but here we are. And then you have the spineless administrators that have allowed this problem to fester for the last several months, and now it has metastasized. And rather than expel the students that are involved, suspend those, and if they're found guilty of any type of crimes, expel them, they're negotiating with them. So it's not about the rights and the well-being of the students on campus. Instead, they're capitulating to the demands of the mob, and that never ends well.
No, it doesn't. You're exactly right. It's such a dark moment. I've met so many students who are afraid to even walk across the street to go to a class or get a coffee. That shouldn't be what our academic institutions create.
Well, could you imagine spending $86,000 a year and now you have to go back to Zoom learning? I mean, that should not happen. Every one of these students should sue the college to get their $86,000 back from Columbia University because they signed up for in-person courses. They didn't sign up for remote courses. And rather than take the side of the students that just want to go to class and take their finals, instead they're letting these radicals do whatever they want on the college campuses.
Yeah, no, it's really, it's remarkable. I wanted to zero in on something you just said, because I want to call out some of these media organizations, the Associated Press, where I worked for 23 years. They keep downplaying these things as anti-war protests. First off, as you said, they're not even protests. They're intimidation, and hate, events. But in addition to that, the protesters really aren't talking just about a ceasefire. They're talking about October 7th times 10. They're talking about intifada. They're talking about eradicating Israel from the land it's on. Is the media doing a great disservice to the public by trying to pretend these are anti-war protesters when the protesters are calling for something far more extreme?
Absolutely. And by them downplaying it, that they're basically endorsing it, that they're encouraging it, and they shouldn't be. They should be calling it out. They have a responsibility as journalists to report the facts and to report what's going on at these events. And again, we look at it, we're seeing pamphlets being handed out that the only way Palestine becomes free is to destroy America, the death of America. And that should be reported. I mean, that would have been a headline 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we wouldn't be witnessing this, but 20 years ago, that would have been a headline of the AP. Today, they're trying to provide cover to these organizations, and the question is why? We shouldn't be sympathetic to what we're seeing. Again, students have a right to protest, and they have a right to exercise their free speech. But once it crosses a line and impedes other people, it's a violation. And when you have this many young people involved, we also have a lot of people coming to these campuses where we don't know if they're students, okay? Outside agitators coming on these campuses. And it would be nice if the media actually did some real journalism to look into, well, who's coming on these campuses? Who's organizing these events? I mean, let's be honest. College kids are supposed to be broke, yet we're seeing these very expensive, high-quality printed signs that look like they were all ready to go. We're seeing all these tents.
Yeah. The same tent, too, by the way. Yeah, they got them somewhere on a bulk buy, I think.
Well, you're talking about campuses that are like thousands of miles apart, and all these students have the same tents in their little Occupy movements. So this is being organized. It's well coordinated. It's funded. And the question is, who's doing it?
Yeah, that's a really great point. One thing we did do yesterday, and I think it's important for people to understand this. So at Columbia University, students are charged a student activity fee. It's like about $700 per semester. So when you run up 10,000 students, a big amount of money. That money then goes and funds groups that are sanctioned by the university. They can get official funding from the university. 38 of the groups, I believe, is at least 3 dozen. Maybe I think it was 38, but 3 dozen of the groups that are part of this occupation at Columbia University are sanctioned student activity groups, meaning they're probably getting money from the university. The university is essentially funding its own occupation. I bet your parents would love to have that money back.
Oh, well, not only that, let's take it one step further. These universities, even though they are private universities, they receive an enormous amount of grant funding from the federal government as well. Our tax dollars also help fund these private universities. So our tax dollars are being used against us to fund student groups that are chanting death to America. And now at Campus Reform, we just put out a new report how Hamas has actually released a statement in support of the college campus occupations that are occurring throughout the United States. Did you ever imagine that we'd be in this position?
No, it's numbing. It's numbing, except that it's been playing out in front of us for 2 decades. I think about, many times I've been on in interviews with world leaders the last year, and they'll ask me this question. They turn the tables on me. When did America start funding students so that they become anti-American? I mean, what sort of country funds its students to hate their own country? They've seen it for a long time. I think Americans are just waking up to what's really been, about 20, 25-year cycle. China and Qatar and others probably help fostering it with some of the money they're putting into the education system too, right?
Yes, 1/3 of most of these elite institutions received funding from foreign governments. I mean, billions of dollars in endowments from countries like China, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. And I think that this is something that actually does need to be investigated. I mean, when you look at China, China has one of the most sophisticated espionage operations in the world. And I wrote a report several months ago talking about how Chinese intelligence agents have infiltrated college campuses. So we need to really look at whether or not there's foreign entities that are instigating these protests, that are helping fund these protests. And it would behoove these institutions that their administrators work with law enforcement and Congress to find out. And I do call on Congress to open up investigations, not just into the administration's lack of action in shutting these things down, but to find out what's really behind this push. These are not spontaneous protests that just erupted. Again, these are organized, well-coordinated, well-funded, and I think that there is a potential that espionage has taken place. Listen, it's not a secret that Communist China views us in a very weakened state right now. They understand the divisions that are going on in the United States, and so why not exploit those divisions? Why not exploit the instability within the United States to make the situation worse? And the fact that college administrators can't come out and just unequivocally condemn terrorist activities is disturbing, to say the least.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's feckless, and it all it does is encourage more of this bad behavior. There are some ideas floating around Congress. One of them is for any school that has a trust of $5 billion or more, that it would be barred from federal funding without making a specific case for the use of the funds. It seems to me that there's going to be a pause in the political establishment to start to think about, have we gotten this wrong? Have we funded something that now is not educatory, but actually destructive to American society? Do you think there's enough will in Congress to begin to change some of these funding streams?
You never know what Congress, it depends on how much it begins to hurt the election of politicians. And if we see that it's hurting Republicans or Democrats, then they'll be much quicker to act. But if it's not politically, then they're probably going to sit on their hands. One of the things that I would like to see happen, so a lot of foreign students attend these universities, and some of them are great students. At the same time, they should look at, well, if we have foreign students protesting and engaging in extremist activity, chanting death to America on college campuses, a logical society would immediately revoke those visas and deport those individuals. I think that's something that needs to happen immediately, and I don't think it would take an act of Congress to do that. I think the Department of Homeland Security, through Immigration and Customs Enforcement, should be taking a look at this very closely to see how many foreign students are participating in these events, any foreign students are engaging in any type of assault or harassment, and you take care of that problem. I think that's a big issue going on. I also think that, again, when it comes to the college administrators, they need to grow a spine. We are seeing faculty, which is an embarrassment to my profession, engaged in these activities, and tenure does not give you free license to commit crimes. So if there's any professors that are threatening or harassing, assaulting other students, those professors should be suspended immediately, and if they're convicted, they should be terminated and lose their jobs. That's something that the colleges can do themselves. They don't require an act of Congress, and they could also suspend the students engaged in these. Now, Columbia did suspend 12 out of 16 students, and then the very next day, they took away the suspension of 12 of them. So I don't have too much faith in the spineless jellyfish that exist.
Yeah, no, it's a real moment of fecklessness, and I think that's what the students are banking on. Hold out, we'll get exactly what we want, because we always do. And I think that that's the problem. No one's drawn a line and held that line for a long time in these campuses. Last question for you. It seems to me that some of these students, particularly the Jewish students who have been threatened, harassed, assaulted, kept from being able to exercise their right to have an education, that there could be a civil rights lawsuit, a class action lawsuit against not only the universities, but maybe the funders of these organizations that have created this climate of blocking education. Is that something we should be watching for, some sort of novel lawsuit as well?
Absolutely. Be prepared. You're going to see civil lawsuits. You're going to see complaints go to the Department of Education to start investigating the civil rights violations at these college campuses. And there may be some even class action lawsuits against these universities. When you begin to hit the pocketbook, that's when these colleges and universities will respond. And the donor class seems to be fed up with these universities. A lot of people like Robert Kraft of the New England Patriots has announced he's cutting off funding. So these universities are in trouble at a time when there was already mounting pressure on them simply because of the enrollment demographics here in the United States as we become an aging society. I think that this event, while as horrific as what we're witnessing on college campuses, it may be the biggest eye-opener of the reforms that are necessary to begin to fix the education system and stop the poison that's been injected into so many young minds.
Yeah, from the embers, maybe something good will come, but it sure is painful watching this being burnt down. It's just not what we do in America, and yet it's playing out in front of us. Nick, we love having you on. For folks who want to get more of you every day, because I'm a huge fan of your podcast, what's the best way to get the P.A.S. report?
Everyone could go to PASreport.com. From there, you go to any podcast platform, and they could also visit campusreform.org to check out the latest reporting.
Yeah, you do such great work. You are a treasure to this country and a voice of reason in a sea of insanity on college campuses. Nick Giordano, great to have you on today. Thanks for joining us.
Always appreciate it. Thanks, John.
Thanks, buddy. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Let's discuss this a little further and welcome in Nicholas Giordano. Nicholas is a professor of political science at Suffolk Community College and a campus reform higher education fellow. Thanks so much for joining us today. Your perspective on this troubling trend, isn't this precisely what Martin Luther King Jr. said he didn't want? Wasn't that what we were fighting against, 60 years
it's
ago?
really amazing. I teach about segregation and Jim Crow, and never have I imagined that people would actually voluntarily segregate themselves and hold separate graduations because they don't like the color of one's skin. It truly is amazing what we're witnessing on college campuses, and it shows that colleges have just become radical extremist organizations that they allow this to take place. It's actually pretty simple. You hold one graduation for the student body. Certain schools may have their own graduations, but one main graduation. And it's sad because if we think back 4 years ago, a lot of these students never had a real graduation because of the coronavirus, and they're not going to get one this year either, it looks like.
What about the larger issue from here, which is we're going into tribal societies? What's the concern there as it relates to where this takes America if we're going to all be, in essence, in our own tribe?
Well, that's a great point. We've written extensively about this at Campus Reform. I've been warning about this diversity, equity, inclusion model going forward, where all it does is lump people into groups, pits them as oppressor or oppressed, victimizer or victim, and then it turns those groups against each other. And we're seeing the results of this in real time with the pro-Hamas protests that are going on college campuses. And tribal societies simply don't work. I mean, the reality is the United States motto is e pluribus unum. Out of many comes one nation. And yet these people want to divide our society and turn us into an Afghanistan. And I feel sorry for the student body of today. I feel sorry for my children that are growing up because they're not growing up in the America I grew up in, where we were united. We had a core concept of what the American identity is. Now these students are fed messages of anti-Americanism, anti-Western culture, anti-Israel, and it's taking its toll on our society.
You know, it seems to me that there's an underlying narrative here in this idea of having these segregated graduations. And that narrative seems to be, yes, you guys have the same requirements, or you've met the same graduation requirements. You all have mastered the courses that we as a university require of you in order to get a degree. But you're different. You're one group and you may be less than the other, or you may not be part of this whole university community. And so we're going to have these segregated graduations. That doesn't make sense to me.
No, neither does it to me either. And listen, my students are wide range. I have white students, Hispanic students, black students, Asian students, and they're all equally as capable. They all achieve, and they want to celebrate as a class. Most of the student body, the overwhelming majority of the student body, does not want to be divided up. They all accomplish this on their own. They put in the hard work, they got their diplomas, and it should be a joyous occasion, not an occasion to send messages of division and hate.
You know, I think back on, when you brought up the e pluribus unum, I think back to 9/11, and I remember, oddly, my husband and I were driving through California, and I remember I had never seen so many flags. Every house, we were driving Highway 1 with our family, and I remember every single house had flags. Every single house had a flag. I mean, it was the, and I remember thinking, this is such a great country. We are so strong because even though we have differences, I mean, certainly Californians don't necessarily agree with what this little Missouri girl, I ultimately lived in California after that, but at this time I lived in Missouri, and I'd only ever lived in Missouri. And I remember just being so encouraged by that. And I was just thinking when you said that, you know, if 9/11, God forbid, were to happen again today, I don't know that, I think there would be protests against Americans. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I mean, and it seems like 23 years ago is light years away at this point. But I do believe that we'd actually see people celebrating in the streets, some of these radicals. And this is what a failed education system does. It doesn't educate the people. It diminishes the concept of nationhood. And Teddy Roosevelt warned what happens if we become a nation of squabbling nationalities. We are a unique country. We don't have 2,000 years of recorded history together. We don't have one shared culture or shared traditions. And so it's even more important in our country to look at us as a nation of one, as opposed to break us down along every single demographic line. But that's exactly what they're doing. And they've been successful. I mean, we have to be honest. We are pushing back, and everyone can go to campusreform.org and see the work we're doing. But they have been successful up until this point. Now, hopefully, the chance of death to America and the celebrations for Hamas on college campuses are enough to begin to really open the eyes of everyone about what's going on in academia today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nicholas Giordano, we sure do. Thank you for keeping a close eye on this and for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
See you, Nick.
Folks, I never like to compare things to Nazi Germany. But I don't know what else to compare this to. This makes my stomach churn. It is so offensive to see what is happening. The hatred for Jews now on public display, and administrators at college campuses proud of it, refusing to denounce Hamas. Here's the clip from Ben Bergquam asking administrators, staff members of Columbia, will anyone tell us that it is not okay to say death to America, death to Israel on college campus? Roll it.
Can we at least agree Hamas is a terrorist organization? And chanting death to America or death to Israel is not acceptable on a college campus? Anyone? Can I get agreement from anyone? Is chanting death to America or death to Israel unacceptable on college campuses? Anyone? I guess not. I guess it's okay in Columbia.
Not okay. Folks, that's unbelievable. The terrorists, the Jew-hating Islamic terrorists have infiltrated college campuses across America. They've infiltrated. They own these campuses now. I don't know how else to say it. Well, joining me now from Campus Reform, Professor Nicholas Giordano is with us. Professor, I'm so frustrated to show this stuff, but what do you make of what you're seeing play out now over the last few days, weeks?
Well, you're frustrated to show it. I'm embarrassed because this is my profession, and these people are destroying my profession. These spineless administrators that can't come out and unequivocally condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization, that can't come out and say, yes, chanting death to America and death to Israel, it goes too far, that these are not protests. These are not legitimate protests. So when you threaten, you harass, you assault other students because they're Jewish or whatever reason, that is no longer a protest. That's a movement that's going on. When you impede freedom of movement, that's not a legitimate protest anymore. When you say that students can no longer attend in-person classes, even though they're paying $86,000 a year to go to Columbia, which I don't know why, but that is not a protest anymore. And these administrators should resign in disgrace. They should be forced out of these universities because this is something that should be simple. These incidents should not be happening on college campus. They violate every single student code of conduct. Any professor that's engaging in threatening, assaulting, or harassing other students, those professors, tenure does not protect you from committing crimes, and those professors should go immediately. And we have to have accountability within academia.
Part of me says the silence should be held just as accountable as the loud voices, because the silence is just as bad here, Professor.
Well, it is just as bad. At Campus Reform, we've been reporting on how the University of Michigan, they're handing out pamphlets that say the only way Palestinian is free is if death to America. We've been heavily and extensively been reporting on Columbia University and what's happening there. And these are organized. I mean, let's be honest here. There is money behind this movement. Something is going on that needs to be investigated. At Campus Reform, we have great reporters. Will Bayani put out a report months ago about all the foreign monies that are going to the elite Ivy League institutions. And I want America to know that these are the institutions that are supposed to be producing the best and the brightest. We should not go for all the BS. Go to Suffolk Community College. You'll get a better education.
Yeah, I think it's true. You know, money talks. Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, says he's no longer going to be donating to these Ivy League schools. He's disgusted by it. Those are the kind of things that need to happen in order to get these administrators to wake up. But when you shut down classes, to me, you give the terrorists a victory. And when you change your life, the terrorists have won. And I think the Hamas leaders in Gaza are watching this go on in the United States, and they are dancing a jig tonight, Professor.
Well, I mean, first of all, going remote is completely ridiculous. I agree that then you're giving them what they want. You're shutting down the school. And I think that every single student should sue the school, get their money back for the entire semester. They shouldn't have to pay to be on Zoom to take classes. I mean, there's only 2 weeks left, but it doesn't matter. Now, imagine that these protests were different. Imagine this was a different group of people and they was shouting something like, go back to Africa. You know, those protests would be shut down immediately. You know, those students would be suspended. They would be expelled. The professors would be fired, as it should be. So why are we tolerating this? Not we, but why is administration tolerating it? And ultimately, they're endorsing it by being silent.
Forget about a chant like that. If they were outside chanting "Make America Great Again," they'd all be suspended and thrown out of school. That's what an upside-down world we live in. Professor Nicholas Giordano, I appreciate all the work that you and Campus Reform does. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.